World of Warcraft's next expansion was revealed a while ago, Dragonflight. A lot of the system changes they've done to the talent trees and professions look fine, and mechanically this new Evoker class seems kinda neat. Though the designs I think need a lot of work. They are less dragonkin and more dragon tales. But it seems like a bunch of people are fully on board for this new expansion. Sadly, I just am not. And it's not because of the dragon mounts looking like something from Guild Wars 2, or because the Scalies have a playable race to fill Goldshire with, or that after Shadowlands the bar has been dropped so low people are genuinely asking them to use Hearthstone as a lore reference. Hearthstone, where one of the expansions was Medivh turning Karazhan into a party house. No. My reason is over something far more petty, something most people clearly have forgotten about, or were simply not that invested in, and have moved on. I bet a bunch of people would say it's not a good enough reason to abandon the game for the foreseeable future. Yet, it is still the main reason I point to whenever I'm asked why I don't play WoW anymore, and why I have no desire to return presently. No, it's because of this. Yeah, that. I can already tell some of you are skeptical. Really? That's why you won't give Dragonflight a chance? True, it is a pretty bad cinematic. Watching the master manipulator N'Zoth, who can read your mind and bend it to his will, get killed by a glorified laser pointer as the whole of Ny'alotha crumbles away Lord of the Rings style. Sure, it was probably the single greatest failure of Blizzard's story team, taking the build-up of the Return of the Old Gods and the Black Empire all the way back from vanilla to current and just throwing it all in the trash in a single patch, taking arguably the main villains for the vast majority of Azeroth's history, entities whose intentions were so horrible just the idea of their success created the Burning Legion, and minimizing the architect of what by all accounts should have been their great victory to a pawn in Zilval's incomprehensibly idiotic narrative. They took their best lore assets and did this. Oh, but Anduin is a priest Death Knight hybrid, so that makes up for it, right? Elun's got some lore that makes her seem as inept as everyone else in this expansion, so that makes up for it, right? Garrosh Hellscream gets turned into a pile of ash, so that makes up for it, right? Sylvanas and Tyrande's owl go into the maw in the end, so that makes up for it, right? Let me just backtrack and recollect on my WoW journey throughout the various expansions, how I felt about the lore during those times, to help kind of explain why this bothers me so much. Give you my perspective. Get a drink, get some snacks, and get comfortable. This is going to be a long one. I started playing in Burning Crusade, Alliance, which I have mostly remained except for during Miss Pandaria when I played both factions for a little while. I did not have that vanilla experience those classic players on YouTube seem to talk about all the time, but I did do a lot of the classic leveling since I don't think it's really changed until Cataclysm. I learned about the Scourge, the Burning Legion, the Dragonflights, the Elementals, and so on, but what really caught my interest was the Old Gods. At the time, the only Old God in the game was Cthulhu, and his design is really cool. A thousand-eyed horror whispering to you, trying to break you mentally and then physically. I obviously didn't see Cthulhu in-game for a long time because, it was Burning Crusade. Nobody was doing Encourage. All I ever heard about in trade chat was Black Temple, Zul'Aman, Sunwell, and I barely even knew what dungeons were at the time, let alone a 40-man raid. But nonetheless, the Old Gods quickly became the part of Warcraft lore I enjoyed the most, as I learned more about them through quests and some of the in-game texts. I think I was in high school at the time, and the library had a few of the Warcraft books, so I read them along with watching videos about other Warcraft games, because I didn't really have the income to be buying other games at the moment. I thought Arthas and Illidan were interesting characters. I remember not liking Malfurion very much, but Deathwing ended up being, at the time and still to this day, my favorite Warcraft character, because of his connection to the Old Gods as well as how he was portrayed in the books. I was not really that active online at this point, so I didn't even really know Wrath of the Lich King had been announced until people started talking about Arthas in trade chat. I thought, that's neat, and went back to trying to farm gold to unlock flying. That was until I found out Malygos was a boss in the expansion. Not like a main focus, just an Onyxia type thing. One of the dragon aspects. We kill one of the dragon aspects. That seems like kind of a big deal to me. When Wrath eventually did come out, I did not play it immediately. See, my computer was not that great, so if I tried to get on the boats that go to Northrend, I would get stuck in the loading screen so long, the boat would already be headed back to the other continent by the time I loaded, so I'd have to have a GM teleport me off of the boat and actually get to Northrend that way. But when I eventually did get to play some Wrath content, I was excited to see there was probably an old god in Northrend, given the whispers in Howling Fjord, and I was also kind of worried Deathwing might show up randomly as a patch boss when I was certain he was expansion material. But throughout most of Wrath, I mostly did dungeons because my computer was pretty bad and I could not handle the raids without constantly disconnecting. I will say, if I was to play WoW again, it would probably be Wrath Classic, just because I would love the chance to do Ulduar properly at least once. Deathwing remains my favorite lore character, but Yogg-Saron is a close second. I could easily make a whole video dedicated on just Yogg-Saron. But yeah, I mainly did dungeons, listened to Blue Please, and tried my hand at soloing some old content at the time. The Fall of the Lich King trailer came out and I thought it was pretty cool. I was interested to see how the expansion story was going to end, and even if I definitely was not going to be doing the fight anytime soon, I was excited for it to release. At least, that's what I would like to say. But something else happened before that, something far beyond what I could have hoped for.
The world has been broken. A new age has begun. The Alliance and Horde can only cling to hope. Deathwing has returned.
I don't think I have ever been as hyped for anything Warcraft related since that moment. Fall of the Lich King for most people was what they were waiting for since WoW came out, and I'm not gonna lie, aside from the whole there must always be a Lich King thing, I thought it was pretty good. But the instant Cataclysm was announced, I knew nothing else in Wrath would be able to fully keep my attention. Deathwing was taking center stage, we get to see the elemental planes, and surely, with the return of their greatest champion, this would end up being the Old Gods expansion. Well, not really. Cataclysm is still to this day my favorite expansion, and it's the only time I felt compelled to get a physical collector's edition of a game. Going through all the old world zones again on a fresh character to see the impact Deathwing left on the world was really cool. Being able to fly in the overworld was an extremely appreciated feature. Transmogrification was added, and I was really happy about that. It justified me holding on to all those cool looking weapons I got throughout the game in my bank. And in terms of the lore and story, there was probably more in this expansion than any other. I mean, they had to revamp 2 continents of content, so it shouldn't be that surprising. Firelands was absolutely awesome, and the troll dungeons were cool, though I wish they had just made separate portals instead of removing the old raids entirely. But for being what I thought was the Deathwing and Old Gods expansion, there was very little Deathwing and very little Old Gods in it. Don't get me wrong, I think the interactions players have with Deathwing are correctly handled. He shows up and the players, the NPCs, the trash, everything in the zone dies on fire. You are not really going to get a personal interaction with Deathwing like you do with Arthas, but he was pretty absent for most of the expansion, and the Old Gods do get mentioned a few times throughout the questing experience, but it never really felt like they had any presence during the expansion. Sure, we had some tentacles show up in Vashir, Black Fathom Deeps had some new voice lines, and Cho'Gall won the award for best looking transmog in the game, but that's about it. There's also the puzzle box of Yogg-Saron, which, among other things, is the first time we hear about Ny'alotha, the sleeping city, but the Old Gods only really played a part in the final patch of the expansion, which I thought was odd. Though I will say, except for one thing lore-wise, 4.3 was actually pretty good. Deathwing is so powerful at this point with all the Old God power he's been infused with. The other aspects basically say themselves they can't really do anything about him without going back in time to get, in their own words, the most powerful weapon in Azeroth's history. We briefly see a vision where the Old Gods win and Deathwing, their champion, is impaled on top of Wyrmrest Temple, and while it's never great seeing your favorite character in a state like that, it is definitely a really cool looking set piece, and is Very in character for the old gods to do something like that. We go to the past and get the Dragon Soul, and Thrall shoots a laser beam at Deathwing's spine to blow off a part of his armor, and the players chase him down on an airship, parachute onto his back, and tear off more plates, so Thrall can shoot a second laser beam straight through Deathwing's chest as he plummets into the maelstrom, only for him to rise out of it even stronger and fully committed to following N'Zoth's order, tear the world apart. It is such a good set of fights in terms of the story. Shame it has such a horrible ending. For starters, Deathwing is not even in the ending cinematic for his expansion. Arthas died in a cinematic and had some, in hindsight, pretty sad final words. Deathwing got turned to golden dust in-engine and is not even mentioned in the cinematic, so I was not happy about his treatment there, to say the least. My disappointment for that was compounded by the new expansion, Mists of Pandaria. So my favorite character is dead, the dragon aspects lose all their power, and they follow up this with an expansion about Kung Fu using drunk pandas. I decided I would keep playing for the rest of Cataclysm, but when Mists of Pandaria came out, I would take a break. So, for about 6 months I think, I was playing other things. I'm pretty sure around this time I got addicted to playing Terraria because of all the time I spent watching Total Biscuit and Jesse Cox's series on it, until something showed up on my YouTube page showing the Manted in WoW. It was about the ending of their reputation grind where they reveal themselves to be a race that actively still worships the old gods, and that was all I needed to go back and check out that zone because that sounded awesome. Honestly, I could still care less about the Pandaren. They're just not that funny or interesting to me. The Mogu are interesting, and Lei Shen is a badass, but the Manted are probably the best new race Blizzard has introduced. Prey Mantis people that use amber heavily in their construction, worshipping the old gods but having a sort of alliance of convenience with the players. It is awesome. Honestly, I would love the Manted somehow to become a playable race, even though it obviously will never happen for lore reasons, as well as making all the armor sets work with them would be pretty difficult. That's probably why Naga will never be playable either. There was also the Green Fire questline during this time, which I did not get to do until much later, but was still super interesting, and was the reason I was pretty much convinced Illidan would return in some kind of demon-based expansion later on. Spoilers, he did. I didn't really do much of the daily stuff in Pandaria outside of, well, the Manted, so I don't really have any fond memories of the farming aspect or any of that stuff. I will say my opinion on a single character has not changed as severely throughout the course of a single expansion as the ones I had for Garrosh Hellscream. Let's just go over that for a second. Wants to paint the entire continent red, assumingly with panda blood. Alright, go ahead, I don't care. Attempts to have Vol'jin killed. Not good. I like Vol'jin. Crushes Anduin under the Divine Bell. I mean, that sucks, but Anduin really shouldn't have been there in the first place. Still didn't want to see that, though. Basically plans to kick out or enslave all non-Orcish races. Alright, fuck this guy, he needs to go. Resurrected the Heart of Y'Shaarj, recruited the Manted, and turned Gorehowl into an old god weapon. That right there is the one true war chief, and I will defend him from any opposition. Lets the Heart and all my Manted buddies get killed. Fuck this guy, he can't do anything right, kill him. Gets put on trial. What? Yeah, the ending to Mists of Pandaria was kinda meh in terms of the overall story for me. Vol'jin becomes war chief, Varian decides not to dismantle the Horde as Jaina says, much to Rathian's annoyance, and peace is restored. For like 5 minutes. Before Garrosh, Rathian, and some bronze dragon decide that trial is not worth sitting through, and Warlords of Draenor begins. I had very low expectations for Warlords of Draenor, to be honest. It was in an alternate timeline of Draenor, which means there was pretty much no chance the old gods were going to take part in the expansion in the first place, and aside from Gul'dan and Ner'zhul, I did not think the Warlords would really have anything interesting to say or do besides the standard orcish rambling about honor and war, and for the most part that's what I ended up thinking. This expansion was actually pretty fun for me at first because I had 1. A computer that could actually play the game correctly, 2. A guild to do current content with, and 3. Alts to do more solo content. So a lot of mount runs during Warlords of Draenor. Ner'zhul was kind of a disappointment, honestly. The first Lich King in the main timeline dies in what is basically the starter dungeon for the Alliance. Garrosh vs. Thrall was really good until Thrall called in for an assist from the elements. Blackhand was fun and basically is what an orc transmog for Deathwing would look like. Watching Gul'dan put Grom in his place was nice, and watching Gul'dan get pulled through the portal after Archimonde was killed was pretty entertaining. Though that whole one legion across all timelines thing was really stupid. I do remember I was getting kind of bored near the end of the expansion and decided if during the mount runs I had planned that day nothing dropped, I would just take some time off and maybe come back if the next expansion looks good. You know what mounts dropped for me that day? The Onyxian Drake, the Azure Drake, the Blue Drake, and the Green Proto Drake. So I kept my subscription for that month. So really, I did not mind Draenor as a whole. The garrison was kind of boring, but I spent most of my time doing old content or farming materials or hanging out with the guild, so I didn't really hate it as much as other people seemed to. Sure, there were no old gods at all in this expansion, but there was never going to be since it's on another planet anyway. No, something else during that time got most of my hate. Chronicles Volume 1. For those of you who don't remember, Blizzard released these lore books called Chronicles. During the tail end of Draenor, during that huge content drought they had, Volume 1 came out, and of the many things that book conveyed, the one I am focusing on is the nerfing and retconning of the Old God lore. No longer were the Old God's horrors bound in Azeroth, so mighty Sargeras himself would beg for mercy at their hands. No, now they literally can be crushed in a Titan's hand. Now they are just tiny minions to these beings called the Void Lords. So they mostly just ignore them during Cataclysm, let their best followers all get slaughtered in mists, and even when they don't show up in Draenor, Blizzard finds a way to screw them over by turning them into heralds. This was entirely unnecessary, as they could have just made it so the Old Gods and Void Lords were the same entities, and it would have fit in perfectly with the old lore. So you have Cthulhu, the Void Lord, who can't get into the universe at full power, so he makes a tiny avatar, Cthulhu the Old God, to do that for him. The Titans imprisons the Old God, and, like how Sargeras was stuck in Medivh for a while, Cthulhu would be stuck in his prison. Instead, they just made them worse for no reason. So on the one hand, I was not happy with Blizzard by any stretch of the imagination. On the other hand, Legion's teaser with Illidan and the Demon Hunters looked really cool. So I ended up stopping for the remainder of Warlords and planned to come back at Legion's launch. Life got in the way of those plans, and I did not get to play Legion until a few months later, I think. Legion was absolutely amazing. First of all, Xal'atath was a genius idea by the story team. An artifact from the days of the Black Empire for Shadow Priests that whispers to you and makes you want to keep it, not just because it's your artifact weapon, but because it's an interesting character you travel with. And her lore about maybe being a weaker old god that was consumed by the others at the beginning of the Black Empire and trapped in a blade is just such an interesting setup for something. And of course, more hinting at N'Zoth happens through Xal'atath since she knows he's trying to get out of his prison. The whole Emerald Nightmare stuff in Val-Shara was really cool. Oh, and Il'gynoth, one of the bosses from the raid, has so many interesting quotes which relate to future events in the story. Maybe I'll make a video going over everything Il'gynoth has said and what I think his predictions were, because there's a lot to talk about with him. And if you set that aside, the main story in Legion is probably the best story WoW has ever had. Like, for as much as I enjoyed Cataclysm from a lore standpoint, story-wise the patches don't really mesh together as well as, say, Draenor's did. I was really busy at the time of Legion, so I could not play nearly as much as I would have liked to, but I have a feeling if I put my bias for Cataclysm aside, I would have no doubt saying Legion is the best expansion, bar none. The Broken Shore was really cool. Seeing all these characters come together and get beaten down by the Burning Legion. Tyrion gets roasted. Varian dies a hero's death. Vol'jin tries his best before making Sylvanas the new war chief. And this is not like Sunwell or the Burning Crusade. This is not just some small branch of the Legion. They are throwing everything they have to take Azeroth this time. Terrific build-up. The Demon Hunter's leveling experience is cool too. Getting to go to a Legion world, get your ass kicked by Maiev, and then have her come to you for help. Everything from that to the leveling zones where, among other things, Ysera gets corrupted by the Emerald Nightmare and we have to kill her, and Elune comes down and makes her a constellation, to fighting through the Nighthole, to watching Illidan disenchant Gul'dan like Gul'dan did Varian. Just terrific. And then the Tomb of Sargeras, where we get to fight not just the empty husk of Sargeras' avatar, but kill Jaden again. Illidan decides that zerging Argus is a better idea than turtling up on Azeroth forever, and the last patch we go to the Burning Legion's homeworld. Turns out Argus had a Titan soul, and Sargeras is trying to create some kind of dark pantheon out of his previous Titan buddies, which, needless to say, is bad for the universe. We go to the Burning Throne, we beat sense into Agrimar, and with the help of the Titans, we're able to even take down the soul of Argus. And if all of that wasn't enough, well, something really freaking cool happens.
Brother, your crusade is over!
See, on its own, that is really cool, and since I did not look up the data mines for the ending of Legion until the cinematic came out, I had no idea where the sword had landed. I was super excited for the next expansion when I saw where it was. Silithus. Battle for Azeroth was already announced at this point, and honestly, I was not that impressed by the idea of a faction war expansion, but most people seemed to be happy. But the sword landing in Silithus specifically changed my opinion. Not because I suddenly care if Sylvanas gets some Azerite super weapon, or if the faction war suddenly seemed interesting, but because I was 100% sure Battle for Azeroth was just set up for the next expansion. BFA would be for the old gods, what Draenor was for Legion. The last patch of the expansion was set up for the Black Empire expansion, where the old gods would fully break out of their prisons and finally claim the world again. And you know what? At the start of the expansion, it really felt like it was. The Kultirans literally have N'Zoth's tentacles in their armor sets. The Tide Sages obviously are minions or worshippers of N'Zoth. Sure, it was focusing a lot more on Sylvanas than I would like, but it was clear the old gods were being set up for something, finally. I think the moment that pretty much confirmed it for me was when I found the Xal'atath questline, and we finally meet N'Zoth. Xal'atath leaves to parts unknown, and N'Zoth gives us a gift. And you better believe I still have that gift on every single character I have, aside from the one who removed it for the noble goal of getting the toy. There's also a bootleg old god called G'huun as the final boss of the first raid tier. I'm not as big a fan of G'huun as I am of the other old gods. It feels more like a minion, like Il'gynoth, than a true old god, but it's still pretty cool. N'Zoth kept the blade Xal'atath was in, and later on, in another raid, allows Horde players to take it to Sylvanas. This sets up Ajara's patch in her raid, Eternal Palace. Hearing there was a fully underwater boss was not encouraging, but the raid itself was actually pretty fun. But something else happens in that raid, something I have been waiting a decade to see since Cataclysm was announced. This was it. 8.3 was to be the setup patch. Everything was falling into place. I was certain N'Zoth, the most cunning of all the old gods, had the perfect plan ready that would catch everyone off guard and pave the way for the Black Empire expansion. Yogg-Saron would tear Ulduar apart. Cthulhu, who since Legion has been taking a nice warm Azerite bath, would be juiced up and ready to claim Kalimdor. The Mantid would swarm to the call of their gods, the Nerubians would fall in line, and the horrors of Ny'alotha would claim Azeroth. There was one thing that kept nagging at me though, the heavy focus on Sylvanas. N'Zoth gave us a gift, but Sylvanas also gave players the choice to be loyal to her or to the Horde. And while there was a lot of old god setup being put in place here, Sylvanas was the one getting the big money cinematics. including the one where she, an archer with some magic abilities, out-melees Saurfang, probably the Orc's most seasoned warrior. And the Loyalists actually get a special cutscene where Sylvanas basically says letting N'Zoth out was part of her plan. So on the one hand, I was still very sure the Old Gods were about to get their expansion, but at the same time, it could just be a coincidence and Sylvanas is actually the one being set up here. My opinion was at the time, whatever character gets the focus of the 8.3 patch would be the major player for the next expansion. And what was the patch called? Visions of N'Zoth. The trailer was fine. Seeing Anduin punch Rathian as hard as he could in the face was and still is pretty satisfying, and seeing a vision of N'Zoth destroying the Church of the Light was terrific. It's when the developers started talking about what was actually in the patch I started to get worried again. Ny'alotha was a raid, not a zone like Argus, just the raid. There was no new zone for the Old Gods, just reskinned versions of the Veil of Eternal Blossoms and Uldum. The horrific visions, I think, were really cool, and while corruption was not fun to acquire, it was damn fun to use, and thematically is what I wanted. They confirmed N'Zoth was the final boss of the raid, which also had me pretty worried, because unless the end cutscene has him do something pretty significant, that would probably be it for him since he would be getting killed in Ny'alotha. But despite that, I was still pretty hyped for this patch, so much so that I made some Old God plushies, because we know Blizzard is never going to. So the patch came out and I started doing the visions. The cinematic had not been out yet, so I was just enjoying this Old God themed content. Again, I really like the horrific visions and the corruption, even if the latter has too much RNG for actually getting it. I looked through the dungeon journal in Ny'alotha and nothing in the text seemed to give a hint of what was going to happen at the end, so I just had to wait for the cinematic to drop online. And, well, you saw what it was. That's it. That is the fall of N'Zoth, the Old God behind Azshara and Deathwing, built up since Cataclysm as the brains behind the Old God's plans, defeated in his own vision in a way strikingly similar to Deathwing's end by a weapon he all but gift-wrapped to us by drawing attention to it. The gift of N'Zoth never comes back. Instead, we get to watch the sleeping city crumble away, consumed by the light of the heart of Azeroth. The Mantid Queen that we helped put in place in Pandaria is also killed, so it's unclear if they will die out now too. To say this upset me would be a colossal understatement. At this point, I could only hope the next expansion would show what the real plan was. It was called Visions of N'Zoth, so maybe he just wanted to think we killed him. Honestly, I was just in denial. I could not fathom that the story team could make such a moronic decision after how incredible Legion was. So for the rest of the expansion, while I was still playing, I was not super motivated to do the current content. Sure, the art direction for Ny'alotha itself was really good. Honestly, probably one of my favorite looking raids in all of WoW. It just didn't matter. Eventually I just sort of lost interest and stopped playing. I did not actively pay attention to any of the speculation for the next expansion or what was next, because as I thought more about it, the chances of it being what I had been hoping for got lower and lower. When Shadowlands was revealed, I was less upset and more disappointed. They had the perfect setup to give the Old Gods the expansion they've been waiting to get for 15 years, and instead they have Sylvanas solo the Lich King. Then shortly after that, there was apparently a developer interview in which they said in no uncertain terms, not only is N'Zoth gone, Yogg-Saron and Cthulhu are definitely dead too. Battle for Azeroth was not building up to an Old God expansion, it was the Old God expansion. That is all the Blizzard team could come up with, forcing them to share the spotlight with Sylvanas and then be snuffed out in a single patch. All the potential of the Black Empire, the numerous races and major characters tied to the Old Gods, the countless horrors awaiting in their realm, and the full might of their power unleashed, with no titans to back up the world's defense this time. 15 years of build-up for this. I did try Shadowlands briefly. I think I was a bit into Bastion when I realized I just don't care. I looked up the other covenants to see if anything happens which even remotely could fill the void the old gods left. Nothing really stuck out to me. I think the one thing I saw which I enjoyed was Kel'Thas and Vosh coming together again and talking about Illidan. I know a lot of people like Sire Denathrius. From what I saw, he's a pretty good character, but not nearly enough, I thought. He's still a tiny piece of what is primarily Sylvanas and Hot Topic Sargeras' expansion. So, since the content this expansion was just not going to have anything I wanted, I did not play it again. Only keeping track of the lore developments every time a new patch came out or a YouTuber I was subscribed to talked about it, and honestly, each time something new came out, it kinda further justified my not playing. Sylvanas has no issue burning a bunch of civilians to death, but has serious conflict about mind-controlling Anduin. Uther kind of feels bad about what he did to Arthas, but they can't actually let him say anything because Sylvanas must be on screen as much as possible. Either I misinterpreted this cinematic, or Varian's sword somehow stores the wielder's souls inside the blade whole, because I was pretty sure Gul'dan burned his soul away. Arthas is apparently less than a wisp and just fades away forever. And the jailer, like, wow. I don't think I can add anything to what Crimson KB said in his video about the jailer and Yogg-Saron. Check out that video by clicking on the card above. It's a good listen, and he's a great YouTuber who deserves way more views than he gets. And so we arrive at the present, and I do not have any hype whatsoever for Dragonflight. Deathwing is gone, the Legion is beaten, the old gods are dead. To my knowledge, the writers that killed them still work there, and are still writing the story, so as I have not been satisfied with their work, I don't expect that to change either. If you are looking at Dragonflight and genuinely excited for it, those special dragon mounts, the new race, the talent overhaul, seeing Alexstrasza again, or what have you, I am happy for you. Genuinely. I'm glad Blizzard is giving you something to be hyped about. I hope it lives up to your expectations, or, bearing that, at least gives you something to look fondly back on whenever the next expansion after it comes out. Like I said, aside from the lore, it seems to be a genuine attempt at Blizzard to make the game better, and as unlikely as it is, maybe there would be something they show which could get me interested enough to come back to. That being said, I do not think there is anything Blizzard could do at this point to get me to be interested again. If they bring the old gods back, they will not be the same old gods whose whispers brought some of Azeroth's greatest champions to their knees. They will just be set up for some Void Zoval or some other incomprehensibly moronic would-be Thanos. It would not surprise me if they just invent another old god out of nowhere like Cahoon, or we find out Xal'atath's previous old god body is actually buried underneath the Dragon Isles and someone's trying to use it for some nefarious purpose. I just am not invested anymore. Honestly, I am more invested in Hearthstone than World of Warcraft nowadays, and even then I don't play Hearthstone that often because I'm working on some other things. But yeah, I just wanted to get that off my chest since I know the vast majority of the WoW player base does not agree with me on this. For some people, Dragonflight is the new life they need in WoW. Others are afraid it will kill WoW, but the player base seems pretty unanimous in their apathy for this particular issue. Say what you will about the gameplay. For me, WoW's story died with N'Zoth.